Well, Gonzaga's defense was outstanding, and Graham Ike made a triumphant statement that he's back in business in a huge road win for Gonzaga over San Diego State.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Well, we are closing out the show talking about the AP poll. Gonzaga moves up from 4th to 3rd in the polls. We're going to talk about whether they belong there, whether they belong a little higher than that potentially. We're also going to talk about where Gonzaga's other opponents are in the latest polls. But first, we got to talk about Gonzaga's big road win Monday night at the Viejas Arena in San Diego. The Zags take down the Aztecs, one of very few teams that has a winning record over Gonzaga in the Mark Few era. Gonzaga goes into their house. 80-67 is the final score. The Zags very consistent. 40 points in the first half, 40 points in the second half. San Diego State really never challenged too much in this game. They had leads early in the game, as you kind of expect, as the score kind of trades back and forth. But once Gonzaga kind of established an 8 to 10 point lead, it never got much more than that. It rarely got over 15, but it never really got within closer than 8 either. It pretty much maintained like a 10 to 12 point margin of victory or margin of advantage for Gonzaga. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the USC game last year. Gonzaga was a little bit more dominant against USC last year. It was also a neutral site game, but Gonzaga jumped out to a big lead in that game and then just never really let USC get back in. And that's kind of what happened in this one. Some injuries for San Diego State. Miles Byrd did play in this game. He scored 20 points in his only game prior to this season, but he ended up not getting to play as much as he wanted. He was on and off the floor with some injury stuff. Pharaoh Compton had some injury stuff for San Diego State as well. And then with Reese Waters not playing in this one of their best players from last year, we saw Gonzaga basically be able to just out-athlete this team. Push them up and down the floor, use their tempo, get to the free throw line, force some of their players to sit on the bench in foul trouble. It was a really clinical performance from Gonzaga, and it starts with what they did on the defensive end of the floor. We're going to get to Graham Ike's incredible second half. We're going to get to Gonzaga's ability to put this game away at the free throw line. We're going to talk about some of those things, but the best thing that happened in this game, the most important element of Gonzaga's kind of win here, in my mind, outside of Graham Ike, which is it's kind of right up there with the second half that he had, but Gonzaga's defense against a good San Diego State team. They're not as good as they've been in the past. They have a lot of veteran guys who aren't there anymore, like Darion Trammell and Jaden Ledee and Micah Parrish and others, but Gonzaga held this team to barely over 40% on two-pointers in this game. San Diego State was 15 of 35 from inside the three-point line. They were 8 of 25, which is 32% from three. And this wasn't a situation of, they're just bricking a bunch of shots. Obviously, in every game, teams miss open shots. That's a part of college basketball. It's a part of the game. But Gonzaga's ability to contest every single look, the amount of possessions that went 26, 28, 29 seconds before somebody like Wayne McKinney or Nick Boyd is throwing up a mid-range jumper from 15 feet where they're basically just stepping back because they're Dusty Stromer or, whoever else, Ben Gregg, is right in their face defending it. I mean, it happened constantly in this game. Gonzaga's ability to really throw San Diego State off of their offensive game was the critical piece of this contest. The bigs hedged screens extremely well. Graham and Ben were excellent at this, forcing guards to go all the way around them, recovering quickly, getting back into the spot that they want to be. It was a huge area of strength for Gonzaga in this game, and something that hasn't been an area of strength for Gonzaga in the last few years. So seeing them do this well against a team with good players like Nick Boyd, like BJ Davis, like some of the other guards on this team was a huge, huge win for the Zags. They also ran a half-court trap at times off made free throws in particular. They had a three-quarter court press. They were running different defensive sets, getting turnovers, getting out in transition, doing what they wanted to do, forcing the Aztecs into a lot of tough shots. The other big good thing that happened in this game, Ryan Nembhard. What an incredible continued performance that we have seen from Ryan. 19 points, 10 assists, 3 turnovers in this game. The 3 turnovers is more than he had in Gonzaga's first 3 games combined, yet it's only 3 turnovers against a team that was 16th in KenPom's adjusted defensive net ranking or adjusted defensive efficiency coming into the season. A borderline top 15 defensive team in the country, and Ryan Nembhard still knocks down 10 assists with 3 turnovers, also has 19 points to boot, does a lot of his scoring late in this game. It was a huge reason that Gonzaga never let San Diego State get within 2 possessions, within 1 possession, was because of Ryan Nembhard. He'd go fly down the court after a made basket, either get all the way to the rim, get to the free throw line where he was excellent, or find a way to make a little dump pass to Graham down on the block. He was otherworldly in this game, and you cannot convince me, as somebody who watches multiple college basketball games pretty much every single day, you cannot convince me that there is a better pure point guard in college basketball than Ryan Nembhard. There are guys like Braden Smith who do more scoring and more rebounding than Ryan, and are also good passers. DeJuan Harris at Kansas is a good passer, but there is nobody who is as pure of a passer while taking care of the basketball in this entire sport than Ryan Nembhard. I am absolutely 100% sold on that. Another great thing we saw in this game, I loved the effort from Ben Gregg, a player who's had a slow start to the season. Again, we'll talk about Graham and his second half in particular, but Ben has also kind of drawn a little bit of criticism in a season where there hasn't been a whole heck of a lot to criticize for Gonzaga. Ben's performance was kind of drawing some of those notes from folks. He hasn't made a 3-pointer this year. That streak continued, only took 1, and it was not a particularly great shot, so not a big surprise he missed it. But he was 7 points in this one, 3 rebounds, 2 steals, and a block. 2 of 4 from the field. He knocked down all 3 of his free throw attempts. He had multiple key offensive rebounds in the second half that kept possessions alive. This is a tailor-made role for Ben Gregg, and he is going to thrive in this role for Gonzaga going forward this year. The bad stuff, well, Gonzaga wasn't very efficient scoring the basketball. 80 points against a good San Diego State team. You can't complain too much, but they were barely over 50% on 2-pointers, 19 of 37. They were much worse than that in the first half. Kind of found that in the second half. Again, Graham had a big part in that. Only 5 of 20 from the 3-point line. That's 25%. I think 1 of 9 in the second half from 3. Just not an area that Gonzaga really utilized in this game. They were fortunate they didn't need to, but you're going to struggle in a lot of games this year if you shoot 5 of 20 from 3. So that's something you want to see them do a little bit better. Gonzaga's 2 prized additions this offseason, Caleb Battle and Mike Lejayi, not great in this game. The fact that Gonzaga won this game in a true road environment against a tough team, with Caleb Battle only scoring 7 points and not scoring in the second half of this game, that's a pretty good sign for this team going forward. Battle was 1 of 5 from the field. He did make all 5 of his free throw attempts. That is what he is very, very good at. But he kind of had an odd game. It felt like he was a little out of control, a little extra ramped up. I don't know if the crowd was getting to him. I don't know what it was. We saw him make some kind of silly mistakes. He committed a foul really early in the game where he tried to jump to intercept a pass and just kind of body check the guy. You can't do that. You're going to get called for that. He had some other just silly fouls that were unnecessary, was looking a little frustrated, just was kind of an uncharacteristically off night. Certainly not something I'm going to be concerned about long term. This is a guy who's been in college basketball for a really long time. He's played in a lot of tough road environments. He can handle it. But it was uncharacteristic from what we've seen from him up to this point. Mike Lejayi just didn't have a great game. This wasn't as impactful as he typically is in this. We only had 3 rebounds. He had 7 points, 2 of 7 shooting. He also had 4 fouls. Just the fouls were a big part of this game, especially early on. Gonzaga was in the bonus, San Diego State was in the bonus with 13 minutes to go in the first half. Gonzaga picked up 7 fouls in the first 7 minutes. It was just an ugly officiated game. I don't think it was particularly uneven. In fact, San Diego State fans will point out how many more free throw attempts Gonzaga got than them, which is a valid point in terms of how this game went. But it was just the officiating really dictated the pace of the game in a way that I think was not an advantage for Gonzaga. And the fact that they managed to still get out in transition when they wanted to, still play really well defensively, still gobble up rebounds, and withstand a game that took them out of their normal kind of routine, that had their two of their starters really struggle. I mean, Nolan Hickman, we didn't even talk about him. He only had 4 points, 2 of 8 shooting. Now, I thought Nolan played pretty well and took good shots and did things that you expect your senior guard to do. But you tell somebody before the game, like, oh, Gonzaga's going to get out of their rhythm. Graham's going to sit most of the first half. Battle and Ajayi are going to have bad games. Nolan Hickman's not going to hit any threes. They're probably not going to expect it to be a win. And yet that was the case for Gonzaga in this one. And Graham Ike, huge reason why we've been talking pretty much constantly about Graham Ike on this show up to this point, because he has not looked like himself. But in the second half, folks, Graham turned it on. We're going to talk about that and how it led to Gonzaga picking up a major victory here coming up in just a second. But first, Zag fans, listen up. You need to download the Roy app. You've heard us talk about Roy this season and how they've revolutionized the NIL industry. Roy allows you, the fan, to have a say in who gets the NIL money. And here's what I love about it. You get your money back if that player transfers. Roy is helping keep our team intact, and it's good for the game long term. You can show your support by depositing a little appreciation onto that player's account. To do that, download the Roy app. You can see what the logo looks like if you're watching on YouTube, or go to joinroy.com. Now let's spotlight the Roy/Locked On Player of the Week. It's Graham Ike. We're going to talk a lot more about Graham in a second. 23 points, 20 of them coming in the second half in Monday's win over San Diego State. And to show our appreciation, we're going to throw some money into his account on Roy. Every contribution counts. $10, $20, it all adds up, and it's going to help keep your favorite players here in Spokane. Join me and show some love for Graham. Download the Roy app or go to joinroy.com today and use promo code LOCKEDON. Every athlete from every team is here. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for full terms. Roy, support the players, change the game. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. Folks, going to live events is the best. Whether it's concerts, whether it's theater, whether it's comedy shows, and of course now the college basketball season is back. We got live games, we got home games for Gonzaga, we got games planned in Seattle and Portland and all sorts of fun places. I'm looking forward to making a bunch of new memories this year. And great news, when you're getting tickets for these games, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. And right now, if you're looking at getting to that Gonzaga versus Kentucky game, Mark Few, Mark Pope, two of the top teams in the country. That game at Climate Pledge Arena, December 7th. Tickets are on sale. You can get two of them in the upper deck for just $62 a pop on Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still recapping that incredibly fun game, Gonzaga at San Diego State, picking up a 13-point victory on the road to move to 4-0 on the season. We're going to go through the keys to the game that we laid out on Friday's episode of Locked On Zags, what we thought Gonzaga needed to do to win this game. We're going to talk about how relevant they ultimately ended up being in this game for the Zags. Key number 1 was to get Graham going, and it didn't happen in the first 20 minutes of this game. In fact, in the first 75 seconds of this game, that is not even remotely an exaggeration. In the first 75 seconds of gameplay for Gonzaga, Graham Ike already had 2 fouls. The single biggest issue for Graham Ike has been foul trouble. Folks have been analyzing his games this year and have been pointing out, it looks like he's a little slower. Maybe he doesn't have as much bounce as typical. He's getting his shot blocked. None of that really concerns me at all, but Graham needs to clean up the foul. 2 fouls in the first 75 seconds. Turns out the refs were incredibly whistle happy early in this game. He was not the only player to succumb to that. But in the first half alone, because of the early fouls, he doesn't play much. He comes back in later in the second half because Braden can't play 19 straight minutes. And so Ike finishes the first half with 3 points, 2 boards, 2 fouls. But then he goes crazy immediately. In the second half, the first possession of the game, Gonzaga missed a shot, got an offensive rebound. Graham got an and one. The next possession down, Graham scores an easy bucket. 5 points in the first 2 possessions for Gonzaga, and he was off to the races. Finishes this game with 23 points, 9 rebounds, and a steal, 7 of 9 from the field, and 9 of 11 from the free throw line. That is the Graham Ike that we know. In a single half in this game, Graham had 20 points, 7 rebounds. That is incredible for Graham. Really, really good stuff from him. He finally looked, it wasn't even just offensively. I was chatting with people throughout the game on our Discord channel, as well as on the new social media app, Blue Sky. And a lot of what came up was people talking about, like, Graham's, Ryan's getting him a lot of good passes. And yes, don't get me wrong, Ryan made some phenomenal passes to get Graham wide open looks, but his activity level was much, much better. He was moving better defensively. He was hedging screens well. He was getting position. He just looked more comfortable than he's looked in the first few games this year. This was not just Graham looked kind of the same, but he happened to get some good passes. No, he looked better. He looked more comfortable. He looked more angry. He looked more pissed off. He looked like he really wanted to win this basketball game, and he willed Gonzaga to a win with 20 points in the second half, and they needed just about every single one of them. Key number 2 coming into this game was to lock down the three-point shot. That did not happen for Gonzaga in this one. They were 4 of 11 from 3 at halftime. They finished 5 of 20, meaning they went 1 of 9 from 3 in the second half. Just not a great shooting night. Neither team shot well. Both teams played well defensively. For Gonzaga, Braden Huff hit 2 threes. That was really nice to see. I think that's something that if that continues to be a part of his game, it not only helps Gonzaga in a significant way, it helps him. It helps him be more dynamic offensively, which he's already great at. It helps him look better for NBA scouts, which he's still got to show some stuff on the defensive end, although he has improved defensively as well. But the pick and pop was just, it was easy. In a game where getting open looks was not easy, multiple times Ryan and Braden ran that to perfection and got wide open looks. So that is going to continue to be a weapon for Gonzaga, whereas I don't think they'll utilize it as much with Graham, if he's wide open, Graham, I think he's got a little bit of a green light to shoot those. He did a little bit last year, but Braden is more effective in that area. And I think we'll see that. The rest of three-point shooting, like Nolan Hickman had a terrible night from 3. Caleb Battle didn't make a 3. Like guys who normally make 3s miss 3s. It's not that something I'm overly concerned about. The positive I'll take from that is seeing Braden and the way they utilize that pick and pop. Key number 3 coming into this game was to take care of the basketball while also setting the tempo. And I think Gonzaga did a pretty good job of this. The tempo was not set by Gonzaga. The tempo was also not set by San Diego State. The tempo in this game was set by the officiating. So many foul calls just slowed this game to an absolute crawl. That is advantage San Diego State in the sense that they are more comfortable playing at that pace, but it didn't matter. When Gonzaga got live ball turnovers, they pushed every time. Every single time they pushed. Sometimes they pushed too much and missed shots that they shouldn't have taken because they should have slowed it down. I don't mind that. I would much rather see Gonzaga make errors because they're trying to push the tempo than the alternative than being too cautious. Gonzaga should always try to get out in transition when they can, especially against a team that doesn't have a lot of depth because of injuries, because this is just not the same roster that San Diego State has had in the past. You push the tempo every time, and Gonzaga, to their credit, they did it. They ran half-court traps to try to change the tempo, to try to get some of those turnovers. They also only had 8 turnovers against a team that is, again, borderline top 15 in KenPom defensively coming into this game. And Gonzaga only had 8 turnovers. That's phenomenal. To have had so few turnovers in this game while getting to push the tempo and try to dictate the pace as much as they could, I thought they did a really good job in both these areas, and I think it contributed heavily to them getting the W here. Key number 4 was getting to the free throw line and putting San Diego State's bigs in foul trouble. This is probably, outside of the Graham Ike key, the single most important thing that Gonzaga did successfully in this game. Gonzaga went 27 of 31 from the free throw line. That is 87%. 27 of 31. You do that, you're going to win almost every game. You get to the line 31 times and you knock them down 87%. That's phenomenal. Ryan Nembhard was 8 of 8. Perfect 8 of 8. Graham Ike was 9 of 11. Caleb Battle was 5 of 5. Ben Gregg was 3 of 3. This team was lights out from the free throw line. This is compared to 13 of 18 for San Diego State. Gonzaga made 14 more 13 more free throws than San Diego State, won this game by 13. 14 more made free throws. Let me get it right. Won this game by 13. That's the difference right there. That's the difference in this game, quite literally. Huge for Gonzaga to do as good as they did in this area. They also got Magoon Wath, the big man, who didn't have a great game, but is clearly a talent for this team. He's very long, very athletic, had some block shots. They got him in foul trouble. He picked up his 4th foul with 17 minutes left. Ended up fouling out with, I think, 7 minutes to go. BJ Davis had 4 fouls. He had to sit towards the end of the game. There was a lot of foul trouble for this San Diego State team. It allowed Gonzaga to get a ton of free throws in the second half and kind of put this thing on ice. It also forced San Diego State players to play less aggressively because they were in foul trouble. And in one situation, put Guath on the bench, which was a huge advantage for Ike and Gonzaga the rest of that game. Key number 5 was to tune out the noise. I want to make a joke here, so we'll do it. What noise? it didn't seem like the show that San Diego State fan base, we didn't hear him much. We didn't hear him a whole lot. I was wondering if maybe the broadcast was a little quiet. It's possible that it was, but it didn't seem like Gonzaga was too flustered by that crowd. We knew San Diego State wasn't going to go away. I didn't expect Gonzaga to get a 15 or a 14-point lead and then a 16-point lead and then a 20-point lead and then just kind of blow them out like they did to UMass Lowell. Like, I didn't expect that to happen. And it didn't. And that's a credit to Brian Dutcher as a coach. And that's a credit to the veteran players in particular on this San Diego State roster who were not going to get embarrassed at home. They never really felt like they had a chance to win, but they were never out of it either. But the crowd felt that. The crowd felt that they never really got that close. When they would get close, you'd hear some momentum. But, man, this Gonzaga team, again, I mentioned Battle earlier, seeming like he was a little bit extra juiced kind of in that game and maybe a little bit in his head. It's hard to say. But for the most part, this team did not seem bothered by the noise, did not seem bothered by the road environment, certainly not the way that they were against Washington last year. That was the concern coming into this game. And Gonzaga, in a place that's tough to play, Gonzaga certainly didn't make it look all that challenging in this one. Well, folks, prior to this game, Gonzaga was ranked third in the latest AP poll. We're going to talk about whether we think that's the right spot. We're also going to talk about where Gonzaga's upcoming opponents, past opponents, where they're ranked, what that means for them going forward. All that coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, I love a great deal just as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of hot coals just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. So when Mint Mobile said that it's easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I called them on it. Turns out it really is that easy to get wireless for just $15 a month. The longest part was the time I spent on hold waiting to break up with my old provider. Activation is super easy with Mint Mobile. To get started, just go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. You'll see that right now, all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including their unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. So to get this new customer offer, go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. $45 upfront payment required, which is equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month supply only. Speeds slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions do apply. See Mint Mobile for details. All right, folks, closing out the show with what we'll typically talk about on Tuesdays throughout the season, where Gonzaga is ranked in the AP poll this week. Gonzaga is up to third in the poll. Last week they were fourth. The preseason they were sixth, so they have climbed from 6 to 4 to 3 in the first couple of weeks of the season. Right now they are only behind the Kansas Jayhawks, Bill Self's team, as well as the UConn Huskies, the back-to-back defending champions. Alabama fell after their loss to Purdue. That's part of the reason Gonzaga was able to move up. Obviously, this voting was done before Gonzaga's win at San Diego State. Don't know that it would have bumped them over either Kansas or UConn at this point. I feel like this is about right. I think 3 is okay. I will say, for those of you who follow Locked On College Basketball Top 25 and what we do there, I did have Gonzaga third, but I did not have them behind UConn. I had Kansas first, I had Auburn second, and I had Gonzaga third. You know what? I'm happy to be wrong about UConn. I mean, I don't want them to beat Gonzaga, obviously, but UConn needs to prove it to me. They've played 3 teams that are outside the top 330 at KenPom. Like, they have not played a team that is better than one of the 30 worst Division I teams in college basketball. When they do, and they will, they'll play Baylor, they'll play Texas, they'll play, obviously, Gonzaga. When they play those games and they prove it against those teams, then I'm happy to move them back into the top 5, top 3, maybe even top spot. But right now, I'm not quite there with them. Kansas beat North Carolina at home. That's a huge win for them. Auburn beat Houston in Houston. That's a massive win. Gonzaga obviously blew out Baylor, has that Arizona State win, now has the San Diego State win. To me, that teams that have done that deserve to be in a higher spot at this point. So I had Gonzaga third. I don't have huge quibbles with the fact that they're behind UConn. I get it. I understand why they are, but I wouldn't have them behind UConn, but third still feels fine. For Gonzaga's opponents, obviously UConn is second. They were third. They moved up because of Alabama falling from their loss to Purdue. Gonzaga will play UConn on the 14th at Madison Square Garden. They'll play Baylor a week or so before that, and I think they play Texas before that as well. So they're going to have some really tough games in early December, including that game, of course, against Gonzaga. Arizona was 9th. They've dropped all the way to 17th after giving up 103 points to Wisconsin. That was a shocking result for those of you who did not see that game. John Tanji, the starting veteran guard for Wisconsin, went 20 of 21 from the free throw line by himself, scored 41 points in a home game for Wisconsin and a 15-point win over the Arizona Wildcats. I'm a little concerned about Arizona. Again, we're talking about potential future opponents for Gonzaga. This is potential because we don't know if Gonzaga will face them in the battle for Atlantis. Gonzaga will first have to beat West Virginia and then one of Indiana or Louisville, likely Indiana in that game. If they win those two games, they play the winner on the other side of the bracket, which we're expecting to be Arizona, but they have looked challenged on the defensive end of the floor. We'll see if Tommy and that Wildcats team is able to clean that up before that game. Baylor's at 13th. They were 12th. They dropped one spot. Kentucky moved ahead of them because Kentucky beat Duke. Baylor took care of business for what they needed to do. They beat Tarleton State by a whole crap load of points on Sunday, which helped them metrically, which helps Gonzaga metrically. So we're all good with that. Indiana is 16th. They were 16th last week. Shout out to Indiana. They played two really weak teams to start the season, and then they played South Carolina, the only good team that they've played up to this point. They beat them by 16. It was a nice win for Mike Woodson's club. Mackenzie Mbako, their sophomore stud. This kid is really, really good if you have not seen him play. Umar Ballo and Miles Rice, who are more familiar names to most Gonzaga fans, had really good games for Indiana as well. Kentucky is now up to 9th. They were 19th, 10-spot jump for the team Gonzaga will face December 7th at the Climate Pledge Arena. That's because they beat Duke. 77-72 win for Duke. This was a fun game. It was basically a battle of a super experienced team that doesn't have a lot of experience playing together, but basically everybody Mark Pope added this offseason are 4th, 5th, sometimes 6th years guys like Kerr Kriisa and Lamont Butler and Kobe Brea and Jackson Robinson. Ton of dudes who've been around playing a team with 5 freshmen at Duke, and Duke looked really good at the start of the game. They had a lot of athletes. They were just doing a lot of good things, and then they kind of wore down, and Kentucky came back and beat them. And I think this Kentucky team is going to be good. Mark Pope has done some good things against Gonzaga in the past. That's going to be a really, really tough game for the Zags at Climate Pledge Arena. Arizona State picked up 2 votes just like they did last week for that Sun Devils team. No votes for UCLA, no votes for San Diego State, no votes for West Virginia, no votes for St. Mary's, no votes for San Francisco or anybody else. I don't have a lot of quibbles with most of that. I'm surprised St. Mary's didn't get any votes at all. They started the season getting votes. So in theory, people who used to be voting for them in the top 25 have since stopped voting for them. And I cannot figure out why, because this team is 4-0. They beat Nebraska, who's not a great team, but it's a power conference team that they knocked off. The metrics love St. Mary's. Folks, they're going to be good. They're going to be good this year. Paulus Morauskas, who's kind of replacing Joshua Jefferson in the front court, he's pretty much gotten a double-double in every game for the Gales. Mikey Lewis, their freshman guard, looks outstanding. Really, really good. I think the St. Mary's team is going to be in the top 25 sooner rather than later, and I think there's an argument that they should be there. Certainly should at least be getting some votes from the AP voters. Also, Clemson got votes, but Boise State did not get votes, even though Boise State beat Clemson. I don't really get that. I'm not, it's whatever. Clemson got 2 votes. It's not a big deal. But Boise State didn't get any, and they beat them. And then I think, again, transitive property does not always matter, but San Francisco beat Boise State. I think San Francisco's got a game against Memphis this week. Memphis got 6 votes. If San Francisco beats Memphis at the Chase Center, I don't think that they'll be in the top 25, and I don't think they'll necessarily deserve to be in the top 25. But I'm curious if Memphis will continue to get votes and if Clemson will continue to get votes, where if Boise State and San Francisco do not get votes, there's always been a little bit of a West Coast bias and a little bit of a mid-major bias, and I could see that continuing to be the case where I think certainly if San Francisco beats Memphis, they'll deserve some consideration. And if St. Mary's doesn't lose, they'll deserve some consideration as well. All right, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Special shout out to the everyday listeners, those of you hanging out with us on the Locked On Zags Discord channel, those of you on Blue Sky where we're chatting throughout the games as well. Appreciate all of you hanging out. We'll be back with a preview of the Long Beach State game for Wednesday's episode. Of course, on Thursday, we'll recap that game, how it goes. Friday, we'll get you ready for Feast Week and everything else going on in college hoops. Thanks again for listening, folks. And until next time, as always, go Zags.